What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am here to do a bit of a response video to Metal Trenches, who actually earlier of the day that I'm recording this, which was April 11th, he did a ranking video of death metal sophomore albums, and it was a pretty interesting ranking, so I decided to, instead of doing an actual ranking, so to speak, I figured I would come on here and showcase 10 different death metal sophomore albums to recommend to you guys who are wanting to dive even further into death metal and think, well, a lot of debuts from death metal are fantastic. I wonder how the sophomore albums go. And, well, typically with sophomore albums, they can be hit or miss. They can be either just as good, if not better, than the debut, or they could be lesser in quality, or maybe even lower in a band's discography overall. So I got 10 death metal sophomore albums that I think are highly essential, and that I personally recommend to everybody watching this video. So I figured the first one we start off with is probably the most essential and important one, and probably the best out of the bunch, and that's Death Leprosy. Because basically everything you hear in death metal, whether it's death doom, blackened death, brutal death, mellow death, what have you are going to hear elements from this album. I mean, I've talked about this album pretty much ad nauseum for a while because, well, I mean, it's Leprosy. It's an all-time classic album, and not just death metal or extreme metal, but in metal as a whole. I mean, songs like Pull the Plug, the title track, Left to Die, Open Casket, like top to bottom, perfection when it comes to classic old school death metal. And this was the album that pretty much kick-started, or really kicked off, the whole Tampa scene, or the Florida scene in general, because after this album, wow, my voice cracked. After this album, the ball started rolling for other bands to come along and make their first albums, like Morbid Angel, Obituary, among so many others. So yeah, you have this album to thank for the whole Florida scene really getting going. So yeah, Death Leprosy is the first one. Keep going with the classic era of the Florida scene. Probably one of my personal favorites in all of death metal, and that is Obituary's Cause of Death. So Cause of Death, this is an album near and dear to my heart. I lost count at how many times I've listened to this album, and it never gets old. When you start off with a brilliant track in Infected with some of those death doom riffs, and then it gets a little bit thrashy at times, gets a little groove, or gets into a little bit of a groove here and there, and that goes for pretty much most of the songs on this album. Body Bag, Chopped in Half, and one of my favorite cover songs of all time, Circle of the Tyrants by Celtic Frost, they covered on here, and honestly, I could make an argument it could be better than the original. I don't know, Opeth's cover is pretty damn amazing too, but yeah, the way they did it on here definitely made it sound like something they would have done. Other great tracks like Dying, which carries on more of the groove and the doomy vibe. The title track, Turned Inside Out, is a hell of a closer with great lead work. Then again, you got James Murphy on lead guitar on this album, so you're going to get great lead work regardless on whatever he does. But yeah, Cause of Death by Obituary, very important sophomore death metal album. Another one that I feel doesn't quite get as much love in the broader conversations, but in terms of like underground favorites, this one has to be mentioned, and that is, of course, Pestilence Consuming Impulse. 1989, almost into 1990, the last album with the great Martin Van Drunen before he left to go join Asphyx, and I could have put Asphyx Last One on Earth on this list, but I went with Consuming Impulse because I think in terms of Pestilence albums as a whole, this is the best they ever were. Really, for me, when it comes to Pestilence, after Testimony of the Ancients, the band's really not been that great, at least in my opinion. There might be some people that love what they've done since they've come back in the 2000s. I personally am not one of them, mostly because a lot of stuff that I've listened to from that time period kind of sounds a bit samey and a little too overproduced. And it doesn't help that Patrick Mamely is a bit of an egomaniac dickhead, so that kind of plays a role into it. But for me, Pestilence was at their best when they were doing just straight up death metal. And this is a straight up death metal album with a lot of thrash in here too. But Martin Van Druenen's classic vocal style was perfected here. Like on Malleus Maleficarum, he had more of that like thrash forward vocal, whereas here you get why Martin Van Druenen is one of the greatest death metal vocalists of all time. He is just sounds like he's being murdered the whole time. Songs like Out of the Body, oh yeah, and this is the alternate cover, but yeah, Out of the Body, Chronic Infection, The Trauma, Echoes of Death, Defy Thy Master, just top to bottom, classic stuff that I feel should get some more appreciation from the fans of the more broader styles of metal. But yeah, Consuming Impulse by Pestilence. Next up, we get into an album I actually got recently in the collection, but I've listened to it several times in the past, and that's Deicide Legion. Now, full disclosure, I'm not the biggest fan of Deicide as a whole. To me, they only have 3, maybe 4 great albums. The self-titled debut, which I think is an amazing debut. This, perhaps to a lesser extent, Once Upon the Cross, and especially Stench of Redemption. Like, for me, those are the only enjoyable to great Deicide albums. Everything else to me is just kind of blah. But Legion, this was a very interesting album because they decided to kind of go a bit tech death. Maybe not so much in like the lead work. I mean, the lead work's still pretty chaotic, but more in the riffs. Like, the riffs that they were delivering on here were way more technical than what you was getting on the debut or even the rest of their discography. Songs like Satan Spawn, Dead But Dreaming, Repent to Die, In Hell I Burn, Revocade the Agitator. Just top to bottom, and it's only 29 minutes. It is short, but it packs a serious punch. And what more could you ask for from a phenomenal album like this? Also, Glenn's vocals, like his growls got deeper and his shrieks got a little more out of control. But the musicianship definitely stepped up. Although for me, when it comes to overall Deicide, I'm still a bigger fan of the first album. But Legion, definitely a close second. This is a hell of an album right here. Next up, we get into some technical and even some brutal death metal on this one, and that is Kryptopsy, None So Vile. This is a highly essential album in death metal history because, I mean, Kryptopsy, coming from the Quebec death metal scene, along with Gorguts and then bands that followed afterwards like Martyr and then later on Despised Icon. I think Neuraxis is also from Quebec, and Beneath the Massacre. I could be wrong about Beneath the Massacre. But this album, I think, really pushed the whole technical side and the more brutal side of death metal even further. And songs like Crown of Horns, Slit Your Guts, the breakdown. I mean, the breakdowns on all these songs are great, but especially in Graves of the Fathers. Wow. Talk about a chug-a-thon of a breakdown. Phobophile, Lich Mistress, Orgiastic Disembowelment. I mean, every song, again, all 8 songs, and it's only a little over 30 minutes, so once again, packs a serious punch, does not give a fuck what you think. And even at the beginning of Phobophile, you get this beautiful piano melody into a really cool bass line, and then into some out-of-control insanity. Very technical, very brutal, and of course, Flo Monier's drums. Flo Monier's drums are insane, and Lord Worm's vocals, I bow to you, sir. So there you go, None So Vile. So that's half of the album, so now getting into the second half here. One of my personal favorites right here, and one of the best albums in all of Death Doom, and that is Autopsy, Mental Funeral. I think when it comes down to important Death Doom albums, this is one that should be brought up in that conversation, because while it's definitely more on the death metal end of Death Doom, the doomy elements are really present and prominent and well executed. Songs like In the Grip of Winter, Torn from the Womb, Slaughter Day, Robbing the Grave, Hole in the Head, Destined to Fester, Dark Crusade. All these songs are just absolutely incredible. And even like the interlude tracks like Flesh Crawl, Bonesaw, and the outro title track all were really, really cool. And the fact that they went more into the Doom route, whereas on Severed Survival, you had little bits of Doom, but it was mostly like death metal and hints of thrash. Here, this was more proper death Doom with some moments of thrash coming in here and there. Also, this album cover. One of the best death metal album covers I've ever seen. So yeah, Mental Funeral by Autopsy. And I need a drink of water to move on. So, next up, I was debating about between this album and another one, but I decided perhaps this one was a little more important than the other one. 1989, we are talking Carcass, Symphonies of Sickness. So yeah, the second album, late 89, heading into 1990 once again. Talk about a complete shift from where Carcass was on their debut. Their first album, Putrefaction, the first gore grind album. It was terrible production, but still some fun tracks. And song titles and lyrical content just completely disgusting. Then we get to this album, and it's like some of the grind is still there, but this is more towards death metal for sure, as they did 22 songs on Reek, and that was like a little over 30 minutes. This album, you have only 10 songs at about 40 minutes, so they were definitely putting more into their songwriting chops at this point. Songs like Reek of Putrefaction, Exhumed to Consume, Ruptured and Purulence, Empathological. There, for some reason I couldn't get that right. God damn it. Excuse me, I'm just stumbling my words. God! I got it right earlier, so empathological necroticism. There, I got it. Jesus Christ. Somebody's probably going to say, you are fucking stupid. Sometimes my brain goes a little too fast to say some of these titles or words. But yeah, and even Slash Dementia, Crepitating, Bowel Erosion. Just more crazy song titles, but musically they're delivering more memorable riffs, some thrashiness coming in, some more mid-tempo stuff, some cool breakdowns, especially in Excruciating Abdominal Emanation. That's, in my opinion, one of the best death metal breakdowns of all time. And also this fucking album cover. If you just ate and you saw this, I apologize, but I don't give warnings because I don't care. So now moving on to the next one, and this one's very important in terms of technical death metal or even progressive death metal to some extent, and that is Atheist Unquestionable Presence. 1991, this was shortly after the tragic death of original bassist Roger Patterson, who did write all of his parts on this album, but they were performed by, I believe, Tony Choi at this point. But yeah, this is a wacky album in terms of that early technical death metal, progressive death metal, whatever you want to call it, death thrash, because it's still very thrash forward, but it's got a lot of technical play going on. Even their debut, Piece of Time, which I really, really like, kind of introduced that idea. Then it got pushed even further on this album. Short album, only 8 songs at about 30 plus minutes, but every song packs a punch and is complemented with amazing lead work, great bass work, drumming is out of control, and Kelly Schaefer's vocals just go all over the place. Like, sometimes he'll sound like a black metal vocalist, sometimes he'll sound like Jeff Walker, other times he'll sound like John Tardy. He's just all over the map when it comes to his vocals, especially on this album. But yeah, Unquestionable Presence by Atheist. Only 2 left, and for this next one, we're going to go a little bit more modern with this one, but I feel like in terms of sophomore albums, this is very important in terms of modern death metal, and that is Bloodbath, Nightmares Made Flesh. Personally though, I like Resurrection Through Carnage a little bit. Excuse me. I personally like Resurrection Through Carnage maybe a little bit more than Nightmares Made Flesh, but objectively, I think this is the better album, and it's the most essential Bloodbath album. And I think in terms of sophomore death metal albums, this should be ranked among the best. Songs like Cancer of the Soul, Brave New Hell, Eaten. I mean, that's self-explanatory right there. Year of the Cadaver Race, The Ascension, Soul Evisceration. I mean, just again, top to bottom, every song fucking is incredible. And this is where Bloodbath had a bit of a lineup shift as Martin Axelrod became the drummer while Dan Swano went to guitars. And Peter Tattergren from Hypocrisy doing the vocals, because Michael Ockerfeld wasn't available to do this because he was very busy with Opeth at this point. But this 5-piece puts out a fucking mammoth death metal album. Arguably, and I say arguably, the best death metal album of the 2000s. You can argue if you want in the comments below, but yeah. And then for the last one, kind of similar to Pestilence in how it's little bit more underground love and not so much in the broader conversations in this topic. But I wanted to give a shout out to Cancer, Death Shall Rise. Funny enough, I was listening to this album on my headphones while mowing grass, and it was quite fun, yet tiring. But yeah, Death Shall Rise by Cancer. I think this is the best album Cancer ever did. And of course, James Murphy, once again, coming in to do the lead play on this album. And wow, his leads were very melodic, but very technically executed. I mean, songs like Hung, Drawn, and Quartered, Tasteless Incest, Burning Casket, the title track, Back from the Dead, Gruesome Tasks, Corpse Fire, Infernal Decay, like all 8 songs rip your face off. And this is definitely more on the thrash end of death metal. You could argue it's more a death thrash album. But even at that, the death metal is very well done. And while the drums are very meat and potatoes, I love them. And funny enough, they recorded on Igor Cavalera's drum kit, and that's why, say, if you listen to the drums from Sepultura Arise and this album, they're going to sound similar, and I believe that's because both bands just used the same drum kit and the same drum sound, so that's why both albums have similar drum sounds. But, I mean, overall, fucking love this album. Definitely an underrated death metal album in my personal opinion. Like, when it comes to death metal, this album doesn't get enough love in at least to my knowledge from other people in metal. But this is essential. This is awesome. Definitely go check it out. I'll actually have links to all of these albums in the description box for you guys to check out. So there you go. And that pretty much does my list of 10 death metal sophomore albums. This was a bit challenging because there are some other great ones out there I could have brought up. In fact, I'll mention some just to kind of get more out there. Broken Hope, Bowels of Repugnance, Cannibal Corpse, Butchered at Birth, Entombed, Clandestine, Gorguts, The Erosion of Sanity, Immolation Hereinafter, Incantation, Mortal Throne of Nazarene, Niles, Black Seeds of Vengeance, Decapitated, Nility, Necrophagist, Epitaph, Obscura, Cosmogenesis. There's so many. Malevolent Creations, Retribution could have been on here. Morbid Angel, Blessed Are the Sick. There's a lot out there that I could have put on this list, but I had to narrow it down to 10, and I feel like these 10, at least for me, are the most essential for different reasons. Like Leprosy for the impact it made and how it basically kickstarted everything for death metal to come. Cause of Death because of just how amazing it was and how much of a big leap it was from Slowly We Rot. Mental Funeral for kind of crystallizing the Death Doom sound. None So Vile, Kryptopsy for that whole brutal tech death thing. Legion because it's up there among the best Deicide albums, or for some people it might be the best Deicide album. Nightmares Made Flesh for the modern day. Symphonies of Sickness for that early era, and also a little bit of the grind in there. Unquestionable Presence for the proggy tech death stuff, Death Shall Rise, and Consuming Impulse for the hidden gems, so to speak, for death metal sophomore albums. But hope you guys enjoyed this premiere that was up for tonight. So thank you guys for watching. What would you guys say are some of the best death metal sophomore albums? Let me know in the comments section below. And until next time, horns high, and I will see you soon.
What the heck is fellatio?
Cole, out of all the people in here, you should know what that is.
Every time I'm soft, I try to dab a shine.
Is it a new way to torture
It's getting a
people?
little too friendly.
No! Well, it depends on how you look at it.
Wait, so fellatio is stimulation of the penis? Really?
Thanks for letting me do that. I might pick that part.
Cole. It's another name for a blowjob.
Okay. Every time I'm...
I thought it was
It's a deep
punishment.
throat blowjob.
Alright, here we go.
Moving on.
Sounds like Carson's getting one right now.
God damn it.
This game has gone to hell.